Good morning, Garland Nixon here with Joti Brar, and I'm sure if you haven't been living under a rock, even if you have been living under a rock, you're familiar with what's happening between North Korea and Russia. And Joti is going to really get into the importance of how this affects the anti-imperialism dynamic in the world. Let's talk. Hello, Garland Nixon here. And as you probably know, the people online who are really working to push back against imperialism, to push back against the warmongers, et cetera, are being blocked and all manner of machinations are being used to stop people from learning the truth about what's happening out here. So share this on all your social media platforms, share this with all your friends. You see right there under Joti Brar, you see her website. And also don't forget, you can go to Proletarian TV online to see what her organization is up to. But right now we got a lot to learn. We got big things going on. Joti, the term that popped into my mind immediately, I have it in the name of this video, when I saw what happened when the Russians, first I see President Putin's going to North Korea. I thought, well, that's interesting. And then I hear they signed a mutual a pact. If you punch one, you punch all of them. I got a big smile on my face, but I thought about the legacy of anti-imperialism, particularly regarding these two countries. And let's face it, Vietnam too. They haven't signed the same pact, but Vietnam and Russia have, a very powerful historical alliance. Your thoughts on what this means for the world and for those of us who are opposing imperialism?
Sure. For me, the real focus of this is North Korea, because of how completely vilified it's been by the West in recent times, since the fall of the Soviet Union in particular, and how much it's had to withstand economically, politically, in every sphere, because of its refusal to give up its socialist system, its refusal to give up its sovereignty and independence. This visit of President Putin's and the pacts they have signed for economic, military cooperation and assistance, and this treaty that's a mutual defense treaty, no less, this is very, very serious and significant. It also does something to the anti-imperialist camp, which is very, very significant, which we've talked a bit about this before. But this really kind of systematizes what was informally clearly happening, which is that the anti-imperialist camp is coming back together in a way we haven't seen since the death of Joseph Stalin in 1953. Now, at that time, the anti-imperialist camp was very clearly led by socialist communist countries. And those communist countries all worked together under the leadership of Joseph Stalin in the USSR, of Mao Zedong in China, of Kim Il-sung in North Korea. These were the great leaders of the world, and all of the national liberation struggles in the world, whether Marxist or not, looked to them for guidance, for help, for arms, for support of all kinds, and as a kind of base to go to get trained, to get educated. They had a shared homeland in the Soviet Union, all of those countries. What's really significant is Russia, in building this modern relationship with the DPRK, is heavily leaning into the traditions of the Stalin era. President Putin wrote an article for the Korean press in which he specifically talked about all of the feats that were performed together by the National Liberation Forces of Korea under the leadership of Kim Il-sung and by the Red Army under the leadership of Joseph Stalin. He talked about how the Red Army fought side by side with the Korean People's Liberation Army to kick out the Japanese, to liberate the country, how Soviet aid helped to establish the socialist DPRK and start to build up its industry, etc. How during the Korean War, which was imposed on the Korean people by the US imperialists and various of their satellites for 3 years, which killed between 4 and 5 million Koreans. The Korean people were able to fight back with the aid of the rest of the socialist camp. China at that time had only just finished a massively long and arduous revolutionary process. The Chinese Revolution was kind of was announced as successful, let's put it that way. It wasn't like over, but one stage of the revolution and the victory of the people was announced on the 1st of October 1949. In 1950, the Chinese got together 1 million volunteers to go to the aid of the Koreans when they were being invaded by the US occupiers. That's a huge sacrifice that the Chinese people made to try to defend Korea. At the same time, the Soviet Union, although it was in a difficult position because of not wanting to trigger a world war with nuclear weapons, not wanting to be targeted directly and face, again, it was only recently come out of all the devastation of World War II. You have to remember that in 1950, ideologically, the anti-imperialist camp was very strong. But militarily and in terms of its people, many of them were exhausted, after everything that they'd been through in World War II and in their various liberation struggles. The Soviet Union, as you know, lost 27 million people in World War II. They were still busy reconstructing their country, which had been utterly decimated by the Nazis. So in that situation, what the Soviets did was to send pilots. They gave North Korea an air force, which it didn't have. And the USA knew that these planes and these pilots were Soviet, but everybody pretended not to know because they didn't want to get into this open confrontation. So the Soviets they put on, Korean uniforms, but obviously on their radios, they were talking Russian. But there was a kind of pretense it was a North Korean Air Force, so that direct USSR to USA confrontation did not occur. Nevertheless, the Soviet Union sacrificed a great deal also in helping North Korea during that time and showed great strength. They also did something, a little logistical thing they did. A lot of people don't realize that they instituted a roadblock leading into the western part this was a Soviet instigation. They basically set up a roadblock outside in the road that leads into West Berlin. So, Berlin's in the middle of East Germany. East Germany at that time was a new socialist state. West Berlin was in the hands of the West, and they had to get into it to bring supplies because it was their sort of little haven in the middle of East Germany. They basically blocked the road so that the imperialists had to put loads of resources into airlifting supplies throughout the course of the Korean War, which obviously diverted some of their capabilities away from Korea. So it was a deliberate act of solidarity to the struggling people of Korea that they instituted. They just put in this roadblock, So the Soviets were very firm supporters of North Korea. So were the Chinese. The Soviet Union then again, after the end of the Korean War, gave help in rebuilding North Korea. During the time of the Sino-Soviet split, when the imperialists had been successful in sort of pitting the Soviet Union and China against one another, and it was really because of all of the problems that came with Khrushchev and his clique into the leadership of the Soviet Union. But in that difficult situation, Kim Il-sung, the leader of North Korea, was brilliant in navigating a very difficult situation so that he maintained friendly relations with both. That was almost unique in the socialist world at that time. You had to be on one side or the other. And it tells you a lot about the genius of Kim Il-sung, that he was able to navigate that and maintain good relations with both sides, to have trade with both. So, of course, then in 1991, when the Soviet Union fell to counter-revolution, the position of North Korea was very, very bad. They call that period the arduous march. They really had to tighten their belts. They came very close. I mean, a lot of people say that they had famine and millions starved. From everything I've understood, I don't think that's actually true, but I do think there was hunger, and there was a lot of belt tightening. There was rationing, basically, very severe rationing. But because of having a planned economy, they were able to do rationing in a fair way that meant, everybody lived on the minimum. But it was really, really tough, right? A very, very tough period to get through. But North Korea was expected to fall with the socialist camp, like Cuba was expected to fall. And it was phenomenal that neither of them did, considering how small they are and how dependent they had been on, the trade within the wider socialist camp. So when the whole of the Soviet Union and the whole of the East European bloc, overnight was gone, that's a massive shock to a small country's economy when that had been its, kind of trading partners and people they relied on for certain essential resources. In the period since then, there have been many times when both Russia and China at different times have been persuaded by the West to join Western sanctions or endorse them or approve them against Korea. China's never totally cut off North Korea, but there's been times when Russia has got on board with the Western campaign, post-Soviet Russia, against Korea. So this move is truly significant. It really marks the end of the West's ability to stifle another country through a sanctions regime. I think we're going to start to see something similar happen with Cuba, with Venezuela. With Venezuela, you can see it's already started happening. With Iran, it's already started happening. The time when the imperialists could take countries separately and isolate them from the rest of the world economy and say, we are going to strangle you and suffocate you and punish you for trying to be sovereign and independent. I think this deal has really signified that has come to an end. Russia and China both have learned that the West can't be trusted, that its treaties aren't worth the paper they're written on. You can't negotiate with them. You can't believe anything they tell you, that the reasons they give you for doing things are never their real reasons, right? And that you're never going to get out of it what they pretend. You won't have their respect. And there's no way to get along peacefully with them and also remain sovereign. And that's the really important part, isn't it? Like, you can roll over if you want to be a comprador and a proxy and let your country and your people be looted in return for some backhanders. You can have a very nice relationship with the USA, but understand that they're the master and you're the puppet. If, on the other hand, you want to lead your country in the interests of your country, not in the interests of what the imperialists want to get out of you, the imperialists won't forgive you no matter what you do. No matter how well you try to conform to what they tell you the rules are, the rules will change. No matter how well you try to show them, look, we're not threatening you, they'll feel threatened. Because from their perspective, you are a threat. You're in the way of their ability to keep making profits. And that is a threat to their entire system. So I think the Russians and the Chinese both have finally and painfully learned this lesson. And what we're seeing as the crisis and the war drive in the West accelerate, we are now seeing an accelerating coming together of the anti-imperialist camp. And I think that with Russia, China, and the DPRK at the core of that, you've got something that's fantastically solid and is, as I said earlier, very much reminiscent of what we would see in the world back in 1950.
Something that you brought up a while back, and I've been paying attention, and I think this is the embodiment of it. I'll throw this part in. I've heard people in the West, Putin hates communism, he's anti-communism, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Vladimir Putin's a pretty smart guy. And what we've seen is, as his country has become under attack, he's been smart enough to recognize that there are many things that are legacies of the Soviet Union, that there are tools there, there are opportunities there, there are things that they did that he has to revert back to, right? That, number one, a lot of people don't know this, the second largest party in the Soviet Union is the Communist Party, and they've been supporting him, and they've been saying for a while, See, we told you so. You know, that's what they've been about this whole thing about Ukraine. The communists have been saying, you better act, you better do this. And now they're saying, hey, buddy, we're supporting you on this, but keep in mind, we told you so, right? Okay. Right now, we're seeing the Russians really start to spread their wings in Africa, to revert back to the legacy of the Soviet Union's relationship with Africa, the legacy of the Soviet Union's industrial capacity, nationalizing the military-industrial complex, and now foreign policy. So this business, if he's anti-communist or whatever the case may be, seems to be a bunch of hooey, because he seems to recognize that these powerful communist countries are going to be internally, they're a great ally for him politically. Externally, he's reaching out to these forces. Your thoughts on these arguments that he's anti-communist or whatever, and how this dynamic is playing out now with his two strongest alliances now. Powerful countries are socialist. And where does he go? Vietnam. What is Vietnam run by? The Communist Party of, might I add, and where are they sending ships to the Caribbean? Cuba.
Cuba.
Your thoughts?
You know, I'm not a Putin whisperer, and I don't pretend to be. I don't know what he thinks about communism. What I do know, and you know, there's plenty of, you know, communists in Russia who absolutely hate Vladimir Putin, and they see him as an oligarch. Well, I don't think he is an oligarch. Clearly, he's a representative of the Russian bourgeois, but he's an anti-imperialist representative of the Russian bourgeois, because he's learned that that's what you have to be if you want Russia to be sovereign. And I keep coming back to that, right? If Russia is going to be sovereign, Russia is not going to become an imperialist power. You know, everybody's always saying they're imperialist because they're big, or they're imperialist because they have this, that, and the other. They're not an imperialist power, and they're not going to become an imperialist power. What they're trying to be is a sovereign power, right? A sovereign country that is allowed to live its life inside its own borders, according to, you know, use its resources as it sees fit, you know, etc., develop in the ways that it would like to. The problem is the West is determined not to let it. And what it's learned is, if it wants to stay sovereign and not be destroyed, dismembered, and made completely subject, and, you know, cut into pieces and looted, the only thing it can be is a strong anti-imperialist. The West has shown there was no way out of a war. You know, President Putin tried for a decade not to have it, well, 2 decades even, but definitely for a decade, he tried really hard not to have a war with NATO. But NATO wouldn't let that be how it was going to be. You know, fundamentally, this war was provoked by NATO, and no amount of peacemongering from the Russians could prevent it in the end, because it's the imperialist drive to war that has impelled this situation. So then the question is, well, what do you do? You're in a situation you didn't want. You wanted peaceful coexistence. You're not allowed to have it. So what are you going to do? Are you going to roll over and be defeated, or are you going to stand up and fight? Well, Russia realized finally it had to stand up and fight. In the process, it also understands that this war has many fronts. So when you're an anti-imperialist power facing imperialism, one thing you have to do is have your people on side. They have to feel like they have a vested interest in the war and winning the war. They have to feel like the government gives a shit about them. Pardon my French, right? So you can't fight imperialism and fight your people simultaneously. You look at any country that's targeted by imperialism, no matter what its social system officially is, they will be doing things in the economy to benefit the people. They will be subsidizing essential goods. They will be running certain industries by the state for the benefit of the nation as a whole, including the poor. They will be doing things to keep the people with them through education, through healthcare. They will not be allowing their people to fall into dire poverty and have a terrible time without doing anything about it, because they can't face an enemy at home and the massively strong enemy that is NATO abroad, right? It's not possible. So whether or not President Putin ideologically believes in the planned economy, it's been made very clear by the process of the war that it is the planning, the planned aspects of the economy and the ability to revert to planning in essential areas is what has enabled Russia to survive. First of all, they started to do this actually in 2014 when Crimea had its referendum and rejoined Russia. The West went crazy because, of course, Crimea was the golden apple of Ukraine. It was what they really wanted. And they lost it immediately that they carried out their coup. And they were really foaming at the mouth about it. They've never stopped going on about it. They still talk like this war won't be over till Crimea's liberated. It's like, yeah, okay, get over yourself, mate. It's like never going to happen. Absolutely never going to happen, right? But they won't let up on it. So from that moment, the West started putting sanctions on Russia, quite heavy ones. And the Russians started to realize how vulnerable they were to Western sanctions. Now, luckily for them, they had this period where the sanctions were kind of slowly and steadily ramping up. So again, rather than just cave to the pressure, they kind of got together and said, okay, what do we do about this? And they did have a Soviet legacy to draw on. It's not like they never had good agriculture. They used to they used to feed their people, all of the Soviet people, and export grain to the world, right? So they were very good at agricultural production. Ever since the 1930s, the Soviet Union was a brilliant, modern agricultural producer. They had tremendous industry and technological capabilities, and educational infrastructure, and all the things you need for a modern economy. They had because of the Soviet Union. They had been some of them allowed to run down. They're not what they were. They're not what they would have been if it was still socialism through all of these, last 20, 30, however many years it's been. I can't count, 35 years. But that sort of social habit and the infrastructure and the knowledge to do all those things is all still there. And it was never like completely destroyed and dismantled and all privatized and sold off. And there was ways to resuscitate and rejuvenate a lot of that. And the government made big efforts to put money into redeveloping Russia's agriculture, bring back the dairy industry, bring back this industry, bring back that. They reinvested heavily because they recognized if they're really gunning for us, we're going to need to be a lot more self-sufficient. And so, they did spend those 10 years, I would say, quite wisely in terms of rebuilding their economy. And we saw the fruits of that when NATO launched its sanctions blitzkrieg in February and March 2022, because Russia did not fall over. The steps they'd been taking had always been in response to Western threats and Western sanctions. But over the course of the previous decade, those had built up into quite considerable capabilities. And each of those, as you say, are as a result of planning and state intervention, as opposed to just let the free market roll, right? So the people and the government of the Soviet Union have, learned a lot about the realities of capitalism and the free market. Now, the truth is, the Soviet people never wanted the restoration of capitalism. There were referendums across the Soviet Union. In Ukraine, it was like 80-something% of the people voted to keep the Soviet Union. Right? They didn't want it to be dismantled. They didn't want the restoration of capitalism. It was done despite their wishes, not because of their wishes. But even the people who thought that capitalism and free market, believed the Western propaganda that everyone's going to have a swimming pool, and this is all that's holding us back. Is this silly planning. Found out to their cost that was not the case. In fact, it's quite interesting. Sorry, slightly, I think it's related. We had a couple of our young members went to Sochi in March for the youth festival that the Russians hosted there then. And one thing that they reported back to us is the increasing numbers of Russians they met who were starting to realize that the rot set in the Soviet Union and the time of Khrushchev. There was apparently an exhibition there. So everything that they thought was communism was actually, leadership who were undoing the gains of real socialist development steadily over the period from 1954 onwards. So a lot of the things that they were frustrated with in the last days of the Soviet Union, it wasn't socialism that they were cross with, right? It was the distortion and dismantling of socialism that had made life, less optimal. Let's put it that way. Although, of course, they still had homes and healthcare and education and jobs and, security of existence, many things that they totally took for granted and didn't realize what they were going to lose. But a lot of people are realizing that. Apparently, there was an exhibition in Sochi, in the biggest exhibition hall, right in the main foyer of the biggest convention center there. There was an exhibition about NATO and its history of lying, and duplicity, and aggression. And right in there, in that exhibition, it was mentioned that Khrushchev was the first Russian leader, Soviet leader, who wanted to try to get Russia into NATO. He wanted the Soviet Union to join NATO and offered that to NATO in 1954. Of course, he was refused, because the whole point of NATO is to destroy the Soviet Union, not to be its ally. They spun these lies about wanting peace and that all they were upset about was socialism. But it was always nonsense. They wanted to destroy Russia and colonize it. So that's interesting that, even from a governmental level, there's beginning to be this recognition in their official narratives that the Stalin period was a period of Soviet attainment in every field. And Khrushchev was the beginning of the problems of the people of the region. And that's something that people like me have been saying for a long time, but it's interesting to see that this is a narrative that's starting to make its way into the mainstream thought of Russian people. The Stalin era is being very much resuscitated. What we're not yet seeing is a resuscitation, of course, of what Stalin based himself in, which is Lenin. There's still a lot of official discourse against communism, a lot of blaming of modern day problems on Lenin and the Bolsheviks, and, didn't they do crazy things? When, of course, all of the gains of the Stalin period come from the fact that Stalin was a brilliant Leninist and putting into practice the politics and the plans that have been formed in the period of Lenin's leadership. He always called himself a pupil and a student and a disciple of Lenin. He wasn't someone who ever tried to set himself up as doing some crazy new kind of a thing. He was just following Marxist-Leninist, politics and economics. And in that way, he showed the brilliance of Marxist science, because when put into practice, the Soviet Union achieved breakthroughs on literally every front you can think of, from health technology to education. So it's a very long-winded way of answering your question, but you are asking about whether Vladimir Putin is anti-communist. And, like I said, I can't tell you for him as a person, but what I can tell you is, as a country, Russia has realized it needs to intervene to make sure the people are taken care of, so that they're on side against imperialism. Otherwise, imperialism will win. They've got to also win the war of, they've got to break out of, or break the imperialists' ability to isolate them. So on the diplomatic and military front, it's very important that they have allies, that people understand why they're fighting and support them in that fight. Now, who do you think are the countries around the world who understand that the best? Well, guess what? It's the communists. Why is that? Because it's only Marxism that really explains to you what imperialism is and why you have to fight it. Everybody else is still playing this game of imagining you can argue with the imperialists using human logic, okay? And that there's a way to make them happy with you, and there's a way to pacify them, and But Marxism teaches you, and life as a communist country in a world that's still dominated by imperialist powers also teaches you very harshly that you can't negotiate with the imperialists, and that they are impelled by a logic that is impervious to all of your kind of friendly overtures and your attempts at diplomacy and all the rest of it. The West doesn't do diplomacy. It does duplicitousness and it does dictation. Do as I tell you is one approach. And when they try the friendly, it turns out it's always lies. You can sit, you can have a grand ceremony, you can sign loads of documents, you can all shake hands and go away and think you've done the deal. And then you turn around 5 minutes later and realize, they didn't mean it. They don't think they have to stick to their word, because as far as they're concerned, might is right, and the drive for profit overrules all human considerations.
You know, one of the things that's interesting is I've seen many times where the imperialists have gone after, you know, whether it's socialist or a particular politician or whatever, and people are like, and they say, we don't like them because what they're advocating doesn't work. And ultimately, you find out it's the opposite. They don't like them because they know it will work and that people will want it. And I look at right now the, you know, here's what they do. They completely cut Venezuela off from the from the economic infrastructure that they built. And then they say, look at Venezuela, their economy is crashing from mismanagement. I've heard of, you know, this garbage, right? They've got a problem because I see, and my understanding of Eastern Ukraine is that there is a very, very strong socialist sentiment, extremely strong socialist sentiment in Eastern Ukraine. And that as I see Russia expanding, Eastern Ukraine, Belarus has come into their economic orbit. Eastern Ukraine, but that you know, that was kind of like the industrial jewel of the Soviet Union. You know, Eastern Ukraine, they built, you know, gigantic industry. They've got the coast, they got ports, they have good, you know, workers, etc. And bringing North Korea into their orbit, not as a vassal, but bringing them into their orbit as an ally, mutual benefit, whereas they have areas of their country where they need workers. Now, North Koreans can come there, they can work, they can go back and forth. Another important thing, they said, we're going to do trade, economics, and travel. So now you'll have people going back and forth, whether it's for skiing or the different things they have, all of those things, creating a alignment, an orbit where they've got, as I said, Belarus is a friend, Belarus is an ally, but Belarus is not a vassal. Same with that, North Korea voluntarily saying, hey, look, this is a big, powerful country. We need help. They'll help protect us. We're in. And Russia saying, hey, we can benefit. You can benefit. You're a communist country, whatever. Who cares? We're all going to work together. The power of this, as opposed to a Western vassalage. You do what we tell you or we'll blow up your pipelines. And even if you do what we tell you, we'll still blow up your pipelines. It's just who we are, you know, as opposed to what's going on there, the difference in the alliance. Anyway, your thoughts on all of that. And I add, the fear of the U.S. to say, my God, we've been saying North Korea doesn't work. Now they're going to be brought into a system where they can flourish and people are going to go, it looks like South Korea's economy is going in the wrong direction and North Korea is going up. God knows Venezuela, they've got a lot of resources and a lot of people that are well educated, been there, can tell you that, under Chavez, same kind of legacy they have of the Soviet Union. This idea that you're going to have the socialist countries, the anti-imperialist countries on the upswing, while the people here are angry because they're standard of living is rapidly decreasing. Anyway, I said a lot. I'll throw that to you, Joti.
You know, the foreign policy aspect of Russia today is one of the ways in, or the areas in which the present government of Russia under President Putin is leaning really heavily into its Soviet legacy, into the traditions of proletarian internationalism, that Russia was the first state to establish those types of relations internationally. They were the first socialist state, and they set up a new kind of foreign policy, which was, we are all equals, we are all human beings, we will respect you, and we will have relationships based on mutual respect, assistance. We will help our allies to develop. We will help countries which are colonized to break free and liberate themselves. We will share technology instead of monopolizing technology. It was the fact that they established those types of relationships from 1917 onwards, which was the beginning of breaking the technological stranglehold and dominance of the imperialist world over everybody else. And that process has been ongoing, but I think that this bringing together now of Russia, China, and the DPRK is smashing it now forever, because those are all countries which, for different at different rates and different reasons, but all initially because of socialist planning and because of imperialist aggression, have worked very, very hard on their technological development. All of them. All of them have a strong technological and military base, and that includes the DPRK. The DPRK will doubtless have its own technologies that it can share with Russia and China, and that will benefit those countries, just as China and Russia can benefit them. You know, this is not a one-way Korea is the poor victim and it's just going to be lifted up by Russia and China. North Korea has done a spectacular job of developing its industry, its economy, its military, its technology under immense pressure. It will be able to do that much faster without the sanctions pressure that have made things so difficult. But it was doing it. You know, Korea, if you look at pictures that come from North Korea, they're hard to get hold of, but there are places where you can find them. And, you know, there's certain places where I can go and see, you know, every couple of months I'll see a picture of a new housing development that's been put up by a collective farm, and it's beautiful modern housing, and the keys, there's a lovely ceremony and festival because the keys are being given to the people who are going to move into those houses just for free. This is your house now, right? And you know, the setup of their collective farms there is extremely modern. You know, very nice living conditions for the people who work on those farms and live there. You know, modern machinery, and they've been developing some quite cutting edge kind of robotic technologies. You know, I don't get into the details of this stuff, but I have friends who like to look into it, and they tell me, you know, that North Korea's worked very hard on some of its agricultural machinery, like little machines, little robots doing things in fields. So, you know, the idea that this is just a one-way street is wrong. But of course, together, that development path can be massively accelerated. You know, there are many things they can share with one another when it comes to everyday technologies for just production of things, but also when it comes to weapons technologies, which of course has to be the priority, unfortunately, in this world where the imperialists are trying to destroy every center of sovereignty and independence. The most important thing those countries have to do is defend themselves. And with this joining together, with this cooperation pact, they will be sharing technologies. This is what I was saying, you know, the Soviet Union smashed that ability of the imperialists to dominate technologically. Now, in 1991, with the fall of the Soviet Union, the USA really, and the imperialist world really pushed down once more technologically on the world. They said, you can't touch us for arms. The one power that could have touched us, the Soviet Union, is gone. We're going to make sure no Soviet Union ever rises again. But they got complacent. They forgot that people can continue to develop, even though they've, you know, something that they had is lost. They forgot that it was possible for Russia to get back off its knees. They forgot that China was on a road to development and would one day catch up. You know, they got kind of complacent that, you know, we're the cleverest, we're the biggest. We spend this much more than everybody else on weapons. We've talked about this before. You know, what turns out to be a somewhat hollow nature of a lot of US and imperialist military spending, and how much of it actually goes on anything that's useful. But all of that to one side, the technological stranglehold and monopoly has been broken. And the Soviet Russia today, its foreign relations are very much based on that same model, as are China's, as are the DPRK's, right? The DPRK, throughout its existence, has been helping countries that were prepared to have alliances with it technologically and militarily. It's for a long time had a very strong relationship with Iran, for example. And I have no doubt that DPRK engineers advised the Iranians on how to bury all of their important military infrastructure, because this is something that the Chinese and the Koreans have a very, very long and successful history of. Tunnel warfare was a big part of both their liberation struggles, right? Goes back a long way. So, and of course, you know, the DPRK probably is today's, you know, people don't talk about it. I think probably the foremost expert on hiding things underground, you know. So we still don't know all of the military capabilities of the DPRK. There's a lot of things that they've been doing underground that, you know, you're not going to find out about until the, you know, imperialists push it too far and get a shock. So this foreign policy of Russia is very much leaning into the Soviet heritage and the Soviet model. And you can see that, one, by their actions, and two, by their words. In words, wherever President Putin goes to revive an alliance that was strong in the Soviet era, he recalls the Soviet traditions of friendship, of mutual respect, of trust, of assistance, of cooperation and development that benefits everybody. He reopened the university, or renamed, or did something. I've slightly forgotten the details now. You know, the Soviet Union was famous for establishing educational establishments for the people of the colonized world. In the Stalin era, they had a beautifully named university. I love the old Soviet names. The University of the Toilers of the East, it was called. And it specifically aimed at, you know, bringing people from the colonized world to give them a good education. And while they were being educated in you know, general academic subjects, they also got educated in Marxism, and they also got educated in guerrilla warfare, and, you know, got help to some armaments. You know, so they went back, you know, very, very strongly able to help their countries to liberate themselves from colonialism. It was, you know, one of the many reasons that Stalin was utterly hated by the imperialists, was how much real significant help the Soviet Union gave to so many national liberation struggles. And Russia, everywhere it goes, is reminding people of that. So in its public discourse, it is constantly reviving the Soviet Union, constantly, you know. So whether President Putin loves communism or not, he needs it. He needs to rely on the history of the Soviet Union in order to promote good relationships around the world today, and say, look, you can trust us. We're those same people, right? We have a long history, don't we, together? He's talking about the history that began in the times of Stalin. He's talking about the respect that was shown to those countries because they were socialists and anti-imperialists who saw each other as on the same side against imperialism, and who wanted to build a different type of world. And, you know, for all they use a different language, this vision of the multipolar world, to me, actually, what it really means, if you're talking about a world without imperialism, you're looking forward to a world where people are able to progress to socialism without the interference of the imperialists.
Here's what, since we've got a few minutes, we'll go till we've got a little about 15 minutes or so. What I'd like to do is read a couple of things. I have a copy of the agreement. I'd like to read a paragraph here and there of the agreement and get your thoughts on it. Okay. Okay. It says, according to the treaty, the two sides, taking into account their national laws and international obligations, shall permanently maintain and develop a comprehensive strategic partnership based on mutual respect for state sovereignty, territorial inviolability, non-interference in internal affairs, principle of equality, and other principles of international law concerning friendly relations and cooperations between nations. The two sides shall aspire to global strategic stability, and establishment of a new fair and equal international order, maintain close mutual communication, and strengthen strategic and tactical cooperation. It's interesting that this is an agreement between two countries, two sovereign countries, and they make it clear we're respecting each other. I'm not going to try to tell you what to do inside yours, but they say the two sides shall aspire to global strategic stability and establishment of a new fair and equal international order. What are your thoughts on the fact that that is in a treaty between these two countries?
I mean, the truth is that there's only one path to that end point, and that is the defeat of imperialism. That's what I hear. When I listen to those words, I hear we have had enough of trying to coexist in a world where the imperialists still exist. It is not possible. Peaceful coexistence is dead. There is no such thing. It's us or them. It's the past or the future. It's imperialism or it's socialism. Now, President Putin might not understand or want to understand that the future without imperialism is a socialist future, but the DPRK certainly understands it. You know, it's been phrased in a very kind of legalistic and slightly kind of tactful way, but that means we are in the fight against imperialism together until it's possible to establish a different type of world order. Oh, you're muted.
Let me read this. The two sides, with the aim of maintaining international peace and security, shall discuss and cooperate with each other in the matters concerning the global and regional development that could be a direct or indirect challenge to their common interests and security within the framework of international bodies, including the UN and its specialized organs. One of the things that the Russians and the Chinese talk about a lot is the UN. And here's what I hear in that and in their discussion a lot. Look, you guys are you've created a legal and a economic infrastructure, the imperialists around the world, that is arbitrary and capricious, that benefits you. You change the rules whenever you want to. And we're looking at building a fair infrastructure where everyone can go to, they can know the rules, that the rules are transparent, the rules are equally applied, So I think it's interesting that they mentioned, even though the imperialists have captured the UN, people are like, why would they trust the UN? It sounds like to me what they're saying is we want to build an order, a fair order, where we don't need to destroy the UN. We need to release it from imperialist control. And then we can have like an international world court that is really a court that's not very arbitrary and capricious. Your thoughts on the mentioning of the UN, the mentioning of like maybe an international legal infrastructure that is fair?
That is actually recognized by all and seen to act on behalf of all. This is very much a part of the diplomatic war, right? To remove all of the excuses that people have for failing to side with the anti-imperialist camp, remove all of the kind of propaganda props of the Western narrative, which is just a narrative, right? But sometimes it needs exposing for people who haven't quite understood yet. And the diplomatic, one front of the diplomatic war is about these international institutions, So I guess there's a general agreement that in any type of world, international institutions are going to be necessary. And the question is, what should they look like? Now, there's a kind of general prejudice in the world that the United Nations is what should be the kind of world's arbitrator, if you like, and the place where countries come together and discuss things. Whether the UN in its current format can ever be saved or reprieved, it's a moot point for me. It seems pretty flipping unlikely. You would definitely have to, it would have to be differently funded, differently structured and moved. So essentially it wouldn't really be the UN as we've known it, but maybe maybe there's a point in the future where just for the sake of, diplomacy, they do all of those things and still call it the United Nations, although it's actually something completely different, right? But the funding formulas, everything about it would have to change in order for it to do the job it purports to do, but actually doesn't do. We've had this conversation before, haven't we, about the difference between the charter and the reality when it comes to the UN, and the fact that in effect, it has been since, very soon after World War II, the colonial office of US imperialism, and a mechanism for that. I think part of the diplomatic war is helping more and more countries to properly understand that, to expose in the eyes of governments and of people the mechanisms of control and coercion, including via the UN and other bodies, that stop countries being sovereign, stop countries being equal, and it exposed the hypocrisy of so much of the official narrative of the West. So I see those kind of clauses really as part of that, struggle to win the hearts and minds of people, if you like, to the idea that what Russia and China and the DPRK, what they're all about, they are not the aggressors. If you live in the West and if you live under the blanket of Western propaganda, which so many people around the world, including in colonized countries, do live under this, kind of engulfing blanket of Western propaganda, then you are constantly told that Russia, China, the DPRK are aggressive. And really a lot of this is about trying to kind of bring people away from the idea, help them to use their experience and their eyes to see who it is who's aggressive, who it is who's controlling, who it is who just wants to be allowed to live and breathe in peace, who it is who actually wants to have international rules that can be applied to and respected by everybody and not used as an instrument of coercion by a handful of, very rich dominant states.
Another thing that's interesting, they really mention a lot of things and talk about, integrating their nations together, but they talk about respecting culture. They mention the issue of culture over and over again in this document, and sports and blah blah blah, right? And here are my thoughts. One of the things that's, let's face it, aggravating a lot of people in the West and aggravating a lot of more traditional countries is this whole, not the issue of the LGBTQ or the transgender stuff. They're like, yeah, people can do whatever they want. But the fact that the ruling elite, for some reason, are using this in a divisive nature. All the movies all now have to have, the whole rainbow flag stuff going on, where what I hear from people is, look, I got nothing against anybody. There's always been gay people, LGBT, whatever, right? Who cares? But that's their lives, leave them alone. But the ruling elite, for some reason, not even the LGBTQ community, it's the ruling elite that are saying, let's use this cultural issue as something divisive, as a method of control, right? And when I hear culture, and when I look at what's happening in Russia, in China, in Africa, in the Middle East, they're saying, look, we don't want to have that discussion. There are areas that are oppressive towards the LGBTQ community, and I firmly disagree with that. But I'm just saying, it seems to me that that's an issue also, that many places in the world are saying, we don't want you to force the ruling elite's cultural proclivities, shall we say, and use of divisive cultural issues. We don't want that forced upon us. And part of what they're saying, I think, is this: we don't want the West forcing their cultural changes on us. Anyway, your thoughts, Matt? I don't know, maybe I've said too much, but I wanted to throw that at you to see if you have a response.
No, definitely. There's a few things. The first is this weaponizing of the LGBTQ plus whatever. A while back, it used to just be gay rights. Now it's kind of got bigger, women's rights. But this weaponizing of those particular ideologies comes from two directions. One is the gay rights struggle was a brilliant way of confusing the workers in the imperialist countries and all the workers everywhere who are struggling for socialism about what is the real essence of the women's struggle or the struggle against racism, both of which are class questions which cannot be resolved without a socialist revolution. You won't end the oppression of women in a class society. You won't end racism while there's imperialism, right? So both of those, to be truly solved, they need the revolution. The imperialists were very determined to make us believe that there were questions of rights before the law, questions of language, questions of attitudes, and to basically get the workers to blame each other for problems that come from the system, right? So they've been quite successful in that. In the process, they found they had this brilliant weapon because gay rights, allowing people who are homosexual to have a life free from prejudice is something you can do without changing the economic basis of your society. So it's a quick and easy win for the West. They are making life for women worse again, although it had got better for a while. It's getting worse again. They're making racism worse again because they're having to double down on those things because of the crisis and the war and the need for scapegoats. But the one thing they can solve and stand up as champions is the question of prejudice against gay people. So why not, right? They've done it. And more than that, they then use that as a thing to hit people over the head with, like, I'm enlightened and you're not. Again, it fuels their kind of culture wars. But it's been a brilliant tool. They've long been using it against Iran, for example. You hit Iran over their head with this question of gay rights. And they did it to Cuba, socialist Cuba. Oh, they don't have gay rights. And it's like
African countries, they do it to African countries.
it's a propaganda thing to say that the socialist and anti-imperialist countries who are struggling hard to lift up the lives of their people are repressive, and we in the West who want to colonize and loot and keep everybody enslaved, we're enlightened because look how nice we are to the gays, right? And that literally, that's what that's been. So we used to call it pink washing, right? They would pink wash Israel, like, oh look, they've got gay rights in Israel, although they're genociding the Palestinians, but don't worry about that. Look, gay rights. And Iran is terrible and repressive because over there they don't jump up and down with pride flags and walk around the streets in strange underwear in the summertime, or whatever things that are associated now with pride that I find somewhat bizarre and beside the point. But anyway, so this is why LGBTQ in particular has been used as that type of weapon. And then, of course, we have, the mass campaign of, the promoting trans ideology, which I've talked to you about before, which is a very useful weapon for imperialism in decline because it is based in the kind of ultimate idealism philosophically, as in you are what you think you are. And that's a denial of material reality. And once you have people in a state where no science is true, there's just what you feel and what you think, they're very malleable, very manipulable. They're good little consumers of anything you want to throw at them. They're good recipients for all your horrific ideologies. And they are the opposite of the kind of workers who are going to understand and get involved with Marxism, which is based on objective reality, right? So Marxism is materialism. It's the highest achievement of materialist understanding of the world. And the trans ideology, I'm not talking about the poor little abused kids who've been swept up on it. I'm talking about the ideology that underpins this movement that says you are what you think you are and no one can tell you any different despite what your chromosomes say or what, reality says. Reality is what you think it is. This is profoundly anti-working class, anti-socialist, anti-humanity. And of course, people, who haven't been conditioned for 40 years to accept the premises on which it's based, just look at it and say, that's insane. Now, this thing about respecting cultures, I think, is really interesting because, again, the Soviet Union was the first country to show how once you remove class relations and the need to have scapegoats and people who are better than other people, you can have a different type of development and you can have a different type of culture. In the Soviet Union, which was on the territory of what had been the Russian Empire, so there had been very unequal relationships. Now, this is something that President Putin, who's not a communist, likes to gloss over and pretend like in the times of the Tsar it was like this too. It's not true. The traditions that he pulls on when it comes to culture are Soviet traditions. The Soviet Union did an amazing job of helping peoples who've been kept in subjugation and in backwardness to develop in ways that respected their unique heritage and history and culture. There were parts of the Soviet Union where people had been nomads, where their language was only an oral language, never been spoken. They created alphabets so they could write it down, so they could educate those people in their own language. And then they educated them. And then they gave them, modern industry and development and a good life. But the best parts of their heritage and their culture were captured, their dance, their song, their oral history, their poetry was captured. It was translated into all the other Soviet languages and shared across the Union. And in that way, the best from all of the cultures was appreciated by all the people in all the corners of the Soviet Union. They were very, very reading and educated people, the Soviet people, because of the revolution. At the time of the revolution, they were mainly uncultured, uneducated, illiterate, very, very downtrodden. So again, the image we have today of Russian people as enlightened and educated people, as cultured people, comes from the Soviet Union. It's not a Russian tradition, it's a Soviet tradition. Okay, and Russia of today likes to say it's Russian, like we've always been like this. It's not true. It's a Soviet. Soviets built that, created that population and that culture and the atmosphere of fraternity and cooperation and respect. Mutual respect was the foundation of building a multinational, multi-ethnic Russian culture, Soviet. Now they say Russian, multi-ethnic Russian culture, but of course it was a multi-ethnic, multicultured Soviet culture. And they really did. All of the different national groups and languages and traditions fed into creating the sense of what the modern Russians have. And it came from the Soviet Union. So this is something that, you know, they have experience in creating and offering to the world. And you can see how that model shines next to what's on offer from the West, which is total subjugation and to our culture and our ideologies and our domination. And of course, what we realize today is Western culture is not about culture. It's not about let's appreciate Jane Eyre and William Shakespeare, which, let's not forget, those type of authors were massively popularized amongst ordinary people in the Soviet Union. They translated the best literature from across time and across cultures and across the world for their people to read and appreciate. So they don't, it's not a culture war like we hate Western culture. They very much appreciate anything that has a real deep meaning and quality to it. But what we realize today is Western culture means the Western Hollywood propaganda machine. And what they're saying is we won't be dominated by and controlled by and have our children's minds warped by your horrific propaganda machine, whose only purpose is to turn the masses into your slaves.
And I'll, you know, we're just about out of time. I'll throw this in there. And one of the things that we see is that this, to be quite frank, this woke culture thing is a new tool. It is a new weapon, because I'll recall they said this politician, he's got accused of saying something to a woman 27 years ago. He's got to go. This woman, you know, this, and they just come up with something. They'd accuse a politician. Well, what do you know? Jeremy Corbyn's an anti-Semite. He's got to go. You know what I mean? All this stuff. Okay. And then when Tara Reid came out and said, well, you know, Joe Biden grabbed me a long time. Well, now, one of the organizations that had been all about the Me Too movement, just like closed and shut down their website, said, oh, yeah, come to think of it, we're kind of, our work is done here. Toodles, we're out of here, right? That what we've seen is that this is just like international law when it comes to the imperialist. It is arbitrarily, it's not a rule of law, it's an arbitrary application of the law. And since this isn't a written law, they can use it any way they want. So now one of their people does the unthinkable and they say, oh yeah, we're not important. We've got to go over here and go after whoever, Garland, Trump, you know, some socialist person, whatever. The whole woke culture is arbitrarily used to attack the enemies of the imperialists. You get the last word, Joti.
Totally. You know, the real fundamental thing at the bottom of this, as you call it, woke culture, something a comrade of mine, sadly departed, but pointed out a long time ago, was it's really about shutting people up. And the people it shuts up first are working class people who haven't spent enough time in the right atmosphere, reading the right books to know which words they are or aren't supposed to use, and become terrified to open their mouths because they'll get it wrong and the whole room will turn on them. You know, so it's closing down public debate, closing down people's ability to just say what they think and have an open discussion about ideas, because some ideas are okay and some ideas aren't. And even if your idea is okay, if you say it the wrong way with the wrong phrasing, someone might come for you. And guess who are the people who get stamped on? They're the people who might do damage to the establishment. You know, there is, you know, these, you sort of see these social media kind of pile-ons onto, you know, just some guy trying to say a thing. You know, I've actually seen it in a kind of small scale, not on social media, in a meeting back a few years ago, well, quite a lot of years ago, actually, after well, we call it the youth uprisings. They were known as the riots of young people in Britain in 2011, I think it was. I went to a meeting in East London where a lot of mainly black and Asian young people, youngish, you know, 20s and 30s, were kind of in a hall. And there were some people on the stage who were all, one of them was a rapper. They were kind of various kind of young people's kind of spokespeople, if you like. And they were having a kind of open debate in front of an audience about what the riots were about, what the uprising had been about, and what was the solution to all this thing. And there was a lot of talk about racism, of course, because systematic police brutality against the poor is obviously disproportionately, in your country and mine, affects Black and ethnic minority communities because they are most likely to be poor. But not the only ones, right? And on the stage, there was a very eloquent rapper. I think he's mixed race, but basically Black guy, very from a council estate, but very well educated, self-educated, very, very eloquent, very historically acute, very politically acute, very, so came across very educated, very erudite. Next to him, there's a guy who's clearly had almost no schooling, white, working class, from the poorest section of the working class. He told us his dad was a drug dealer, who lived on a really rundown estate. He's from the absolute bottom of British society. And he tried to say, look, shouldn't we all just be fighting together, because all of these problems affect all of us when it comes to, the police and poverty and all the rest of it. And, he was sort of trying to say something in the, not the most, probably he said it a bit clumsily. The rapper basically got up and stood over him and screamed in his face about his white privilege. And I sat there and I was like, I just thought it was disgusting and so counterproductive. And actually, the white guy was right. We're in this together. And the Black guy's solution was, we can only ally with people who have the exact same skin tone as us. I could never understand the pain of someone who's much blacker than me. I'm just this, it was like, we've got to find our little tiny group. And once we found our tiny little group, then maybe we can start connecting with the other groups and try and find some way to build. It's like, oh God, there's a recipe for never getting anywhere fast, isn't it? But with the cancel culture, what you find is, again and again and again, the way it's used by the ruling class, the utter hypocrisy, as you said. They don't really mean it. They don't care about the rights of minorities. They don't care about protecting people. They don't care about giving us safe spaces and helping us not be hurt. They use it as a weapon, as you said, when it works for them, totally selectively. And we see, once again, as in so many ways, if you look carefully, if you let go of the emotion that they try to stir up in you that stops your critical faculties from functioning, and just take a step back and look, what you'll see once again is it's one rule for us and one rule for them. And as far as the ruling class is concerned, every rule and every standard is for the little people, and none of it applies to them. For them, every tool is fair game, and no life is sacred. No principle is sacred in their battle to stay on top and make profits.
It is the internal iteration of the rules-based international order, isn't it? We can in Yugoslavia, versus Ukraine. You know what I mean? On and on and on. Oh no, certainly countries can't just declare their regions can't just declare that they're free and that they're independent, when they specifically argued in the instance of Kosovo that they could. At any rate, thank you very much, Joti. Tell everybody where they can find all of your stuff. And I know on YouTube it's Proletarian TV, but where can people follow you, find out about all your good works?
Thank you. Well, a good remembering for me that we have Proletarian TV on YouTube. Our website is thecommunists.org. You can also find a lot of our work on platformnews.org, because of course I am also the spokesman for the World Anti-Imperialist Platform, which is doing very important work. We're going to be in the States very soon for the NATO conference and counter conference. I have a Telegram channel, Joti Brar, and my party has a Telegram channel, The Communists. So do look for those. I do always regularly give plugs for Telegram. They're not paying me anything, and I know they're not perfect. All the people who go, oh, but it's this or it's that. I just think it's great to find a place with less censorship. But where my individual content doesn't get censored, you can see anything I put up in the order I put it up. There's no algorithm. There's nothing in between. You can look at it or not look at it, and it's up to you. So, yeah.
Well, thank you very much. And everyone, don't forget, unfortunately for us, YouTube is not quite as gracious, and they do everything they can to censor work such as this. So please, everyone, share this on all your social media platforms, and just put a note directing, if you can, directing them to this channel or directing them to Joti's work, if you please. But please share this; it's very critical. We've got 504 people, so we should get 504 likes and 504 shares on your social media platform. If you've got Facebook and X and Telegram, share everything there, and hopefully people can learn something. This is, in fact, a great time to do it because it's a subject that a lot of people are interested in based on what just happened with the North Korea-Russia alliance, and it's in the news everywhere. So if you share that on your social media platform today, there'll be a lot of people clicking on it, and they'll learn a lot of very, very important things. Thank you very much, Joti Brar.